The Minnesota Twins won their first series since the All-Star break, and they're closing in on the final wildcard spot in the American League. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is always cold, the Twins talk is always hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about the Twins winning their home series against the Athletics this weekend. Let's get into it. Friday night, the Twins had no trouble getting runners on base, but in a strange turn of events, they had all sorts of trouble driving those runners in. Just 2 hits, but 7 walks in a 2-run game, and they grounded into 3 double plays. They go 0 for 8 with runners in scoring position and leave 8 men on base. Meanwhile, Zebby was cruising until the 5th when Lawrence Butler drove in a go-ahead run. Tyler Soderstrom got to Matthews in the 6th with an RBI single, and the Twins lose the opener 2-0. Now on to Saturday, and a late Mike Paredes scratch gives Kendry Rojas the spot start, and he made a case for a permanent spot in the rotation. Rojas was plagued by walks earlier in the season, but on Saturday he allowed just 1 free pass and just 1 hit while striking out 5 in 4 scoreless innings. He gives way for Taylor Rogers in a multi-inning appearance, and it might have been his best during his second stint with the Twins. 2 scoreless innings keeps the game tied at 0 before Alan Roden dribbles a seeing-eye single between first and second to drive into in the bottom of the 6th. Nance, Morris, and Gomez put up zeros as the Twins even up the series with a 2-0 victory. Finally, onto the rubber match, where the Twins score early and often. Austin Martin's leadoff double is cashed in on a fielder's choice RBI by Royce Lewis, and Cody Clemens hits a Little League home run to put Minnesota up 3. In the second, the Twins load the bases, and a run comes in on a balk ahead of a 2-run single by Ryan Jeffers. Twins now up 6-0. Minnesota adds on in the 4th when Ryan Kreidler doubles, steals 3rd, and scores on a throwing error by catcher Jonah Heim. On the other side of the diamond, Connor Prieilipp was dealing, facing the minimum through 5 innings. He allows a single in the 6th and then exits for Cole Sands. Sands promptly hits a batter and gives up a 3-run home run to Nick Kurtz to get the A's within 4. Kreidler doubles, steals, and scores on a sacrifice fly in the next half inning, but the Athletics add on 3 more runs in the top of the 7th. That's all right, though, because Cody Clemens hits his second triple of the game and scores on a Luke Keeschel sacrifice fly. Then in the 8th, Kreidler once again, he comes up with a triple to drive in Brooks Lee. He later scores on a fielder's choice. The Twins give up a couple of runs in the 9th, but they hold on for an 11-8 win. Minnesota improves to 53 and 54. They were in 3rd place in the American League Central, just 3.5 games behind the first place White Sox, and they're just a game behind Cleveland for the final American League wild card spot. Let's get into it. Thank you for joining us here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. You can find us on Twitter and on YouTube at Grey Duck Sports, as we are a part of that Grey Duck Sports network. And you can find us on YouTube at on TikTok rather, at grey.duck.sports, as we've got plenty of content coming through on their clips from these shows, different series that we're working on, all of that coming your way at the Grey Duck Sports Network. Give us a follow on those platforms. It certainly means a lot. Well, it's been a tumultuous kind of 10 games since the All-Star break, where the Twins were coming in on kind of a high note. They win the first game after the All-Star break and then lose 4 in a row, things looking like they could be going down the path of the downtrodden, but Minnesota, to their credit, wins 2 against Cleveland. They win 2 more against the Athletics, no longer Oakland, as I almost called them, but they win 2 more against the A's. And just like they were before the All-Star break, after all of that, after all the roller coastering, the Twins still just 1 spot out of a playoff spot if the playoffs started today, which they do not. We are about 2/3 of the way through the regular season. We're almost to the trade deadline. And the Minnesota Twins are still in the hunt, which I think, for me personally, if I was being 100% honest, would not have thought entering this season. So the expectations for the team have been exceeded by far, and now it's just how far can this team go? And I realize we're talking about a team that is below 500 still, even with them being just 1 spot out of a playoff race, or 1 spot out of the final playoff spot, but even so, it's still fun to be in that position, and even so, we've seen teams get into the postseason that have less than ideal records, albeit not losing records, but still less than ideal records, and make a run to the World Series. The Cardinals in 2006, the Minnesota Twins in 1987. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. If the Twins make the playoffs, they would have a chance at the World Series. I would put it on the very lower end, the lowest percentile that I possibly could in terms of chances. But that's the excitement that we're going to get for the rest of this summer. And we talked about one of the goals here early on in the season for the Minnesota Twins team was going to be, by the trade deadline, do not be in a position where you absolutely have to sell. And here we are sitting a week out from the trade deadline, and we'll have an episode on the trade deadline and look back at last year's trade deadline and what has gone right from that and what has gone wrong. We'll have that tomorrow during the off day. But this year's trade deadline, we are a week away, and the Minnesota Twins are in a spot to compete for a playoff bid. So that means they're not going to be total sellers. They might sell a couple of pieces, but they're going to, at the very least, not be conducting a complete teardown like they did last year. And that is something that I think we can all take a deep breath about. And you might remember that the owner, Tom Pohlad, said after taking the spot from his brother and becoming the lead decision maker of the Minnesota Twins, he said that, well, I can't invest a ton right now because we're in the middle of the offseason and a lot of the big name free agents have already been signed. But if we are in playoff position at the trade deadline, then we will certainly make some moves. Paraphrasing a little bit, but that is essentially the gist of what he said. Now we will see if he stays true to his word when the trade deadline rolls around a week from now. Unless the Twins go on a 6-game losing streak and Cleveland goes on a 6-game winning streak and puts the Twins 7 games out of a playoff spot, I guess that is a possibility. But unless that is to happen, Minnesota will be in prime position to make a run for the postseason, especially if they can get some reinforcements on their roster at the trade deadline. So for me, the goal of the 2026 season has already been reached. The goal that I had at the outset of the season coming into the year has already been reached. And for the final 2 months, it's just like playing with cash money, or with house money, I should say. And we get to see how good this team is. We get to see how good this team can develop. If the pieces start to fall into place in the bullpen and in the starting rotation, which is still being shuffled through a little bit. And all of that, at this point, coming after our expectations have all been exceeded. And yes, we can still get disappointed if the Twins make the playoffs and they lose 2-0 in the AL wildcard spot. I'm not saying that's going to hurt any less because we had lower expectations of this team heading into the year, but it certainly takes some of the shock off of that. And it certainly doesn't feel like, for instance, maybe 2023 did. Maybe 2023 is a bad example, but like 2019, where you weren't sure if they were going to get back. 2020, when you weren't sure if they were going to get back. They had invested much, and they still had not won a playoff game, and were still, despite making all these moves, despite having a historic home run pace in the regular season, it was still the same old Twins. You're not going to have that same sort of disappointment if the Twins make it to the playoffs this year and are swept similarly in the first or second round. And you'll be excited for every step of the way. And if the Twins do make a run to the postseason, a guy that I want to see get a good long look in this rotation is a guy named Kendry Rojas. And I've been talking about Kendry Rojas since the very first show here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. His first couple of spring training starts, he was electric. The changeup plays, the slider plays, and he's got a fastball that runs from 95 to 98 miles per hour. The only problem had been, can this guy get his pitches into the zone? And now in his last 2 starts, the walk numbers, which were gargantuan through his first couple of major league starts, have began to dissipate. And that was kind of the case at AA and AAA for him last year before he came over into the Twins system. He was acquired in the Louis Varland trade along with Alan Rodin. And if he can put some semblance of control together with the stuff that he has, he absolutely deserves a spot in this starting rotation, not as a opener or just a bulk pitcher in the way that the Twins have been using him so far, but they need to give him the number 4, the number 5 spot in this rotation, especially now with Mike Paredes being injured and that spot being up for grabs. So, Kendry Rojas gets the 4 innings. He had pitched earlier in the post-All-Star break stretch as well, and had started and had gone just 2 innings before Mike Paredes came in and kind of blew the top off of things, and it ended up in a Twins loss. And both of those times, with Kendry Rojas being pulled early despite promising starts and promising looks in both of those appearances, I have been frustrated that Derek Shelton has pulled him out early. And it reminds me of in 2002 and 2003 that the Minnesota Twins had a guy that was lights out in the bullpen, former Rule 5 guy with an electric arm, that had shown his worth in starts here and there, but was not given a spot in the starting rotation. And I guess I wasn't privy to baseball and the way that it works to so much depth in 2002 and 2003. I was 8 and 9 years old, so I wasn't paying attention. But I think what is going on right now with Kendry Rojas is very similar to what was going on at that time with Johan Santana. I can imagine that Twins fans were frustrated seeing, yes, Johan Santana get shutdown innings out of the bullpen, but also seeing that that is a multi-inning guy that can be stretched out and has some of the best stuff in Major League Baseball. And seeing Ron Gardenhire continue to keep him off of the totem pole altogether. In 2002, instead going with Matt Kinney, calling him up instead of giving Johan a spot in the rotation. In 2003, when Eric Milton goes down in spring training, signing Kenny Rogers instead of giving Johan Santana that final spot in the rotation. And finally, only relenting when Joe Mays had become so bad that it was an untenable situation for Minnesota to keep him in the rotation, and so they had to bring in Johan Santana. I do not want to get to that point with Kendry Rojas. I want Kendry Rojas to be a starting pitcher for Minnesota from here on out. And you look at the game that he had against the Athletics, and most of his pitches were in the zone. 8 of his 30 pitches were swung at and missed. His changeup wasn't even having its best day, and that might be his best out pitch. He only threw 4 of them. All of them were out of the zone. None of them were chased. They were all balls. And so he was like, okay, I'll stick to my fastball slider because that has been effective as a 1-2 combo out of the bullpen and in Triple and Double A. So I'll just stick to that. And it was enough. Typically a 2-pitch mix from a starting pitcher, especially one that has the control issues like Kendry Rojas and is as young as Kendry Rojas, a 1-2 pitch mix like that is not always going to get you the best results. When one of your 3 top pitches is having an off day, you're more likely than not going to have an off day. And Rojas's changeup had an off day, and it still didn't matter. 1 walk, 1 hit, 5 strikeouts, 4 scoreless innings. Give Kendry Rojas a spot in that rotation, at least for the next month and a half. And if we're in the playoff spot and it's become so disastrous that he can't be in there because we're fighting every game to stay within one of the final AL wild card spot or fighting for an AL Central title, then sure, at that point, pull him. But I think he has shown enough promise to earn a spot in that rotation. And speaking of guys who have a ton of promise, I was super impressed by Connor Prielipp's first outing since returning from the injured list. The Twins activated both Connor Prielipp and Cole Sands before this series against the Athletics. One of them looked good, one of them not so much, but it's both of their first starts back from injury, so you can expect a little bit of rust to be shaken off. And Connor Prielipp, I talked about earlier in the year, is he got into trouble when he was nibbling with the fastball, missing on those nibbles, getting behind in counts, and then his secondary stuff, which is his best stuff, his slider mostly, wasn't as effective because he was pitching behind in counts. So guys aren't going to be as probable to chase pitches like his slider out of the zone or his sinker or his curveball. And I said, well, even though the fastball, it has the velocity, it doesn't necessarily have the movement. Even though his fastball is not this extremely good stuff pitch, although it does touch 97 miles per hour, you can still put it in a spot up in the zone. You don't have to be scared to go up against these hitters with that fastball, even if that fastball is not your best pitch, because we've seen how effective Joe Ryan is going up in the zone with his fastball and just living up at the top of the zone and even above the zone. And I said, I would like Kendry Prieilipp to do a little bit of what Joe Ryan is doing and pitching up in the zone with the fastball, and that allows everything off of that to be more chaseable in the eyes of a hitter. If I'm tunneling pitches the right way and everything looks like it's coming in high, a hitter is going to be much more likely to chase a breaking ball that starts off high in the zone because it looks just like the fastball, and even if it's a breaking ball, you know, you'd assume that it being up in the zone, you could get contact on it, but Kendry Prielipp's slider has so much depth to it and so much break to it that when a hitter makes up their mind to swing at that slider, they better be sure that they are sitting on the slider, or else it's going to be a swing and a miss. Prieilipp has elite secondary stuff. He has a pedestrian fastball in every aspect outside of velocity. But if he can do what Joe Ryan does with his command and continue to pepper the upper part of the zone with fastballs to set up his other pitches, to not be throwing so many balls, to be getting ahead in the count and setting up his other pitches with the tunneling to force hitters to chase, then he's going to have a lot of starts like he did in this one. And I like that change of game plan that he had in this game, because that is exactly what Kendry Prieilipp did on Sunday. Is he peppered the top of the zone with fastballs, and every single one of his slider, his breaking, his off speed, all of that, anything with movement, was at its peak performance in his first game back off of the injured list. Now, Cole Sands also came back, and he tried to give the A's the lead after Minnesota took a 7-0 lead early on. Gave up the first batter he faces, he hits. The second batter he faces, he gives up a 3-run home run. So not off to a great start, but he settled in a little bit. I wouldn't say it was a clean outing in either of the innings that Cole Sands pitched in, but even so, like we said, shaking off some of the rust. But Kendry Prieilipp looks like he is ready to go. And I know right now, the thing with Prieilipp is that he is on a strict innings limit this year because of some of the injury history that he has. So I get that. And that might be more cause later on in the year if some of these guys get back up. Mike Bredes, I know McAble isn't expected to get back up. At the very least, they expect him to start throwing at the beginning of September, and we can see if he gets into a game. I doubt it. But if you can work Kendry Prieilipp for a few more starts, get him into the bullpen so that he can stay under his innings limit and still have that electric slider come postseason if the Twins are in the postseason, and also, shore up your bullpen, which has been one of the worst in Major League Baseball. I think that is a good plan. So I'm not sure how many starts we'll see from Kendry Prieilipp, but I am encouraged if we get more Prieilipp down the stretch here, whether it be starting the game or coming out of the bullpen. I am encouraged by what I saw, and if he can continue that same strategy in his next 2-3 starts, next 2-3 appearances, then that starts to become a trend, and that starts to become a pitcher who's completely changed his makeup, and that is a number 2, number 3 pitcher in any major league rotation. So let's hope that Kendry Prieilipp can do just that, and that this just wasn't some random one-off. Another thing that I noticed from this series was Minnesota's aggressiveness on the base paths forced a lot of athletics mistakes. And earlier this year, I talked about how in an American League that is going to be so jumbled, and still is so jumbled, and mixed together and muddied together, where teams are hardly separated by 2 games. Every single team that's fighting for the playoff spot, it seems like there's 12 of them, and it seems like they're all within 2 or 3 games of one another. And nobody really is separating themselves above the rest outside of the guys in the American League East. But that still opens up some playoff spots for AL Central, AL West teams. And at one point, the A's were one of those teams. We talked about how the Rangers were one of those teams. The Royals, who we're about to face, are one of those teams that are not one of those teams. One of the rare American League teams that is not really in the playoff race and is probably going to sell at this upcoming deadline. But in order to separate yourself, you have to do the things on the margins correctly. And that is aggressive base running. That's running first to third. That's knowing when to steal, doing it smartly, but also not too cautiously. And that's also making plays in the field. And the Twins haven't made a ton of plays in the field and have struggled on defense throughout the year, although they are getting better recently with Ryan Kreidler, getting the lion's share now at shortstop with Tristan Gray back in AAA. And Luke Keeschel out of second base. They've been able to use Cody Clemens there, whose glove has been good wherever he's been put. And Luke Keeschel, even in center field when he has to spell Byron Buxton, hasn't been as much of a liability that you'd think a player who was struggling in spring training to lock down a corner outfield spot in case he was needed in there in an emergency. That was the plan during spring training, was we're going to give Luke Keeschel some time in the corner outfield in case some of our corner outfielders go down. And obviously with him starting most of the first half at second base, you can kind of assume that that plan of getting him reps in the corner outfield didn't look too pretty. And so they had to switch things up a little bit and keep him at second base. So when you consider that this was a guy that they didn't even trust to hold down a corner outfield spot on an emergency basis, doing the kind of stuff that he's doing in center field, that's a big credit to the coaching staff. And that's a big credit to manager Derek Shelton, working with the pieces that he has on this team and using just a bunch of versatile players in positions that they can play at least well. So that defense is improving because you've gotten the middle of the infield shored up. And obviously when Byron Buxton's out in center field, he's Byron Buxton. And then you can move Brooks Lee. You moved Brooks Lee from shortstop to third, where he's been better. You've had Royce Lewis at first and second, where he's been decent. And you're not just being content with keeping players in positions that they are struggling with, which maybe at times Rocco Baldelli could be a little bit too content, or even back in the Ron Gardenhire days. Luis Arraez should have stopped playing third base the moment he threw a error in that Oakland series in 2021. Where we ended up losing 13-12 because of that Luis Arraez error, but yet Luis Arraez still played a lot of third base throughout the rest of that 2021 season, despite not looking very good at the position. Derek Shelton is giving his guys time and not just taking away their confidence by moving them off of a position prematurely or after just a couple of mistakes. But he's taking in the information, then using it to his advantage, and that is one of the ways that the Twins are succeeding on the margins. And the other way, at least in this series, was their aggressive base running against the A's. Ryan Kreidler had 1 stolen base coming into Sunday's game, and he had 2 stolen bases, both of third base, on Sunday. So he tripled his output. And doing to the base that's more difficult to steal. Royce Lewis has not been caught stealing this season, and he's in the double digits for stolen bases now. You've got guys taking the extra base, and especially in Sunday's game where you had a couple of sacrifice flies, where you had a guy come in on a balk, where you didn't have a ton of base hit RBIs driving in runs, but a lot of station to station sort of things, driving in runs, a couple of fielders' choices. Taking those extra bases is pivotal. It's the difference from when Royce Lewis grounds out in the first inning. It's the difference from Austin Martin going second to third and then third to scoring a run. which is what ended up happening. He comes in to score on that Royce Lewis groundout. If he had moved up from second, then he's just going to third, and who knows? I mean, Cody Clemens came up and had that Little League home run anyway in the very next at-bat, but that could change the entire tenor of that inning. And when you are going up in a high-scoring game, you need those sorts of manufactured runs. And that is what the Twins have been able to do here recently. So if they can continue to separate themselves through aggressive base stealing and through some versatile fielding, although not always highly effective fielding, then they're going to stay in this race until the very end, at the very least. Obviously, the teams that are going to be World Series contenders are going to be tiers above what the Twins are doing and are clearing those margins easily. But right now, the Twins are competing against the teams that aren't doing that. Which leads me to believe that this Minnesota Twins team is going to be a heavy buyer at the trade deadline, or should be a heavy buyer at the trade deadline. And I'm not talking about giving away some of your top prospects, but certainly getting some bullpen pieces that maybe aren't top of the line, but are number 3, number 4 guys in other bullpens, and give them the chance to show out in this Twins bullpen. Because as much as I like the churn through the waiver wire and bringing in different guys and seeing what they got and then keeping the ones who look like they've got the stuff and quickly going away from the ones that don't, I think you can sort of speed up that process by using the trading block instead of the waiver wire and have a better idea of the lottery tickets that you're bringing into that bullpen when you have guys with more established track records. And you're not just hoping to find the next Yoendris Gomez when you pick up Justin Lawrence, for example. So the Twins need to buy. I don't know if they need to buy much on offense. I would love to see some starting pitching depth because right now it is getting kind of thin with Mike Paredes' injury and with Connor Prieilipp's innings limit coming up. You've got Ryan, Bradley, Ober as your big 3, and then hopefully Kendry Rojas. And eventually you're going to have to move Connor Prieilipp out of the rotation, or at least he won't be making as many starts. You'll have to skip starts for him, and he might have to be once every other time through the rotation instead of once every time through the rotation. So it would be nice, even if it's not a top-end starter, to get someone that can eat some innings for Minnesota. But I would really be interested in them getting starting pitching and shoring up the bullpen a little bit more. And then I think this team becomes a serious contender, not only for a wild card spot, but for the AL Central, which is hardly a big race right now, with the Chicago White Sox, who are going to fall off the ledge at any moment, being at the very top, and Cleveland struggling all season, although we know Cleveland can go on a run no matter what at any time through the devil magic that they use. We'll talk more about some of the specifics of the trade deadline in tomorrow's off-day show, but I think it is clear that this Twins team must be buyers at this next deadline. And finally, some last piece of housekeeping news. We mentioned it already, but Mike Paredes with an oblique strain is on the 15-day injured list. He had been Minnesota's number 5 starter after the McAble and Bailey Ober injuries. That's when he got his call up, and now he is dealing with an injury of his own, and the timeline for his recovery is currently to be determined as per the Minnesota Twins team website under the transactions and injuries page. So hopefully Paredes gets better because he can be a guy that, I don't know if eats some innings, but at least takes some starts for you. Even if he's not always the most effective, he at least has shown he can win you some ball games at times and help you limp into the postseason if that's the route that you need to take. Hopefully it is just a 2-week injury and the Twins can thicken up some of their pitching depth, which, as we said, is pretty thin at this moment. All right, your Minnesota Twins are going to be off on Monday, and then they will start a home series against the Kansas City Royals at Target Field on Tuesday. We will have the preview for that one, as well as some trade deadline primers for you during tomorrow's off-day show. And as of right now, that is all the Twins news we have for you today. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining in on the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll We'll see you back here after the next one. Go Twins.